Hey guys, tonight we are escaping the blind and white-hot sun of the desert and descending into the cool, dark belly of the earth. We are traveling to medieval Cairo, to a small island in the middle of the Nile, to perform a job that is equal parts holy ritual and bureaucratic monotony. We are going to become water watchers. We are going to sit in a stone chamber for months on end, staring at a marble column, waiting for the river to rise just a few inches. You are going to learn what it is like to hold the fate of an empire and a ruler, watching the lifeblood of Egypt creep up a stick, inch by agonizing inch. To be honest, considering the damp air, the slippery moss-covered steps, and the fact that you are essentially sitting in a glorified well while the rest of the city holds its breath, you probably won't survive this flood watch without developing a severe vitamin D deficiency and a deep-seated hatred for the sound of dripping water. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy here. Also, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is. I love imagining these stories playing out in corners of the world I've never seen. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on the banks of the Nile, and the heat is aggressive. It is the kind of heat that doesn't just warm you, it interrogates you. It presses down on the top of your linen turban and radiates up from the dust of the street, turning the air into a shimmering haze. You are in Fustat, the ancient capital that will eventually grow into the sprawling metropolis of Cairo. The year is somewhere in the 9th century, though looking around, time feels suspended. The noise of the city is behind you. The shouting of donkey drivers, the clanging of copper beaters, the rhythmic chant of the water sellers. But you are turning your back on the chaos. You step onto a small wooden skiff. The boatman, a man whose skin is the texture of old leather and the color of the river mud, nods at you silently. He knows where you are going. He pulls the boat away from the bank, cutting through the sluggish, brown current. You are heading toward Rhoda Island, a sliver of land that sits like a green emerald in the middle of the river. This island is not for the casual tourist, nor is it for the busy merchant. It is a place of gardens and palaces, but its heart, its stone heart, is the Mikias, the Nilometer. As the boat bumps gently against the stone quay of the island, you gather your robes and step out. The air here already feels slightly different, cooler, wetter, filtered through the leaves of sycamore and palm trees that line the shore. You walk down a paved path, the dust silence in your footsteps. Ahead of you stands a structure that looks deceptively simple. From the outside, it is a modest building with a conical roof, indistinguishable from a small shrine or a particularly nice garden shed. But, like an iceberg or a very complicated tax form, the important part is what lies beneath the surface. You approach the entrance. There is no fanfare here. No guards blocking the way with crossed spears. Just an open archway that seems to inhale the surrounding air. You step across the threshold and the world changes instantly. The blinding glare of the Egyptian sun vanishes, replaced by a deep, resonant gloom. You have entered the echo chamber. You are standing at the top of a deep, square well, lined with meticulous limestone blocks that spiral down into the darkness. In the center of this pit, rising from the depths like the mast of a buried ship, is a tall, octagonal marble column. You begin your descent. You take the first step onto the stone staircase that hugs the four walls of the square pit. The steps are worn smooth in the center, eroded by centuries of sandals. Sandals belonging to priests, engineers, and nervous bureaucrats who have walked this same path for generations. A mainstream historical fact to orient you in the gloom. This structure, the Nilometer of Rhoda, was built around 861 AD by the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutawakkil. While Egyptians had been measuring the Nile for thousands of years, using simple stairs or etched rocks, this was state-of-the-art technology. It was a precision instrument designed to measure the water level to the fraction of a finger. It is a reminder that while we think of the Middle Ages as a time of swords and mud, it was also a time of obsession with geometry and data. You continue down. With every step, the temperature drops. The dry, dusty heat of Fustad is replaced by a damp, mineral chill. It smells of wet stone, algae, and ancient silence. It is the smell of a basement that hasn't been aired out since the pharaohs. You pause on a landing to look at the walls. Even in the dim light, you can see they are not bare. They are carved with intricate Kufic script, verses from the Quran that speak of water, vegetation, and the mercy of God. It is beautiful, but it is also functional. Historians still argue about the architectural origins of the pointed arches you see here. Some claim this is one of the earliest examples of the pointed arch in Islamic architecture, a precursor to the Gothic cathedrals of Europe, while others argue it was a localized adaptation to support the heavy earth pressing against the walls. Standing here, looking at the elegant curve of the stone, you don't really care about the architectural lineage. You just hope the engineer did his math right, and the walls don't collapse on you. You look down over the railing. Far below, at the bottom of the pit, is the water. It is dark, almost black in the shadows, motionless and heavy. This is the water of the Nile. It enters through 3 tunnels connected to the river, ensuring that the level inside the well is exactly the same as the level outside. It is a calm mirror, reflecting the small patch of sky above your head. Right now the water is low. It is the season of Shemu, the low water, or perhaps the very beginning of the rise. The marble column in the center is exposed, its markings visible. You can see the horizontal lines carved into the stone, dividing it into cubits, diara, and the cubits into fingers, kira. A quirky fringe tidbit for you: the cubit wasn't always a standardized measurement. In fact, different rulers sometimes use different cubits to manipulate the data. If the caliph needed more tax revenue, he might use a slightly shorter ruler, claiming the water was higher than it actually was. It was the medieval equivalent of putting your thumb on the scale, but on a national level. You trudge down another flight of stairs. The sound of the city is gone completely now. The only sound is your own breathing and the occasional drip-plop of condensation falling into the pool below. It is peaceful, but it is a heavy, expectant kind of peace. You are waiting for a monster to wake up. You finally reach the lower level, just a few feet above the current waterline. You find a small stone bench carved into the wall. This is your office. This is where you will sit. There is no Wi-Fi, no coffee machine, and the view is terrible unless you really like wet marble. But the stakes could not be higher. You settle onto the hard stone. You lean forward, resting your chin in your hand, and you look at the column. You look at the water line, lapping gently against the mark of the 10th cubit. And you wait. You are waiting for the flood. You are waiting for the rains that fell months ago in the Ethiopian highlands to travel thousands of miles north and pour into this pit. You are waiting for the lifeblood of the country. In our world, we check the weather app to see if we need an umbrella. Here, you check the column to see if you will eat next year. You are alone in the gloom. Sitting on an identical stone bench across the shaft is a man who looks as permanent as the architecture. He is the Sahib al-Mikyas, the guardian of the measure. He is an older man, his beard the color of salt and pepper, wearing simple white robes that seem to glow faintly in the half-light. He doesn't look at you. He is staring at the water with the intensity of a cat watching a mouse hole. This job is hereditary. His father sat on this bench. His grandfather sat on this bench. For generations, his family's been the keeper of the data. They are the human spreadsheets of the Nile. You watch him reach into the folds of his robe and pull out a reed pen and a scrap of papyrus, or perhaps parchment, depending on the decade's budget. He dips the pen into a small ink pot resting on the ledge. He looks at the column. He squints. Then, with a practiced fluid motion, he makes a mark. You lean forward to see what he's looking at. The central column is an octagonal pillar of white marble, crowned with a Corinthian capital that looks like it was stolen from an older Roman building, because it probably was. But the important part is the shaft. It is divided into 19 cubits. A mainstream historical fact. The cubit used here is the Daira al-Hashimiyya, or the Hashemite cubit, which is roughly 54 centimeters. But just to make things confusing for future archaeologists, The size of the cubit actually changes as you go up the column. The lower markings are spaced differently than the upper ones. It's a logarithmic scale of anxiety. The higher the water gets, the more granular the measurement becomes, because the difference between a good harvest and everyone drowns is a matter of inches. The guardian dips a long stick into the water, waits for the ripples to settle, and then checks the wet mark against the marble. He grunts. 12 fingers, he murmurs. You nod sagely, as if you know what that means. You don't. Ah. Here's the cheat sheet for the Nile flood, the ancient algorithm that runs this entire civilization. If the water stays below 12 cubits, disaster. Famine. The water won't reach the irrigation canals. The fields will remain dry dust. People will starve. The taxes will not be collected. The caliph will be grumpy. If the water reaches 14 cubits, it's okay. Not great, but survivable. We can grow enough wheat to make bread, but maybe don't open a bakery. If the water hits 16 cubits, wafal nil. The plenitude. The perfect number. The valley is flooded. The silt is deposited. The harvest will be bountiful, and everyone parties in the streets. If the water goes over 18 cubits, disaster again. But the wet kind. Villages are swept away. Cows end up in the Mediterranean. The Sphinx gets wet paws. You look back at the water. It is currently hovering around the low marks. It looks innocuous. It's just water. It smells like mud and distant rain. But you know that thousands of miles away, in the mountains of Ethiopia, the monsoon rains are falling. The blue Nile is swelling. A pulse of water is racing north, carrying millions of tons of volcanic silt. You are sitting in the waiting room for a geological event. The guardian sighs and shifts his weight. He has the patience of a stone. He offers you a dried date from a small pouch. You take it. It tastes sweet and fibrous. You chew slowly, the sound echoing in the shaft. A quirky fringe tidbit. The position of the guardian was so sensitive that they were often kept isolated during the flood season. Rumors could start panics or crash the grain market. If a merchant knew the flood was going to be low, he would hoard grain and drive up prices. So, the guardian was basically an insider trader with a monopoly on the truth. He was the only one who knew if the stock market of Egypt was about to crash or boom. You watch a small beetle crawl across the wet stone near your foot. It stops, waves its antennae at the rising humidity, and scuttles higher up the wall. Even the bugs know the drill. Go high, or learn to swim. The silence is broken only by the lap 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 of the water against the column. It is hypnotic. You find yourself zoning out, staring at the swirling patterns of the silt in the dark water. You start to understand why the ancient Egyptians deified this river. It isn't just a resource. It's a living thing. It breathes. It rises and falls like a chest. And you are the doctor with the stethoscope, listening to the heartbeat. Historians still argue whether the specific calibration of the Nilometer was adjusted over centuries to account for the gradual sedimentation of the riverbed. As the river bottom rose with centuries of silt, the 0 point of the gauge would technically need to move up too. If they didn't adjust it, a 16-cubit flood in the year 800 might be physically higher than a 16-cubit flood in the year 1200. It is a debate about mud physics that drives hydrological archaeologists crazy. But for you, sitting here in the damp, it just means the water is getting closer to your toes. The guardian stands up. He walks over to the vertical graduated strip carved into the wall. A backup measure in case the central column breaks or falls over, which has happened. He double-checks his reading. He nods. It is rising, he says, his voice flat. Half a finger since dawn. Half a finger. It sounds like nothing. But multiply that half finger by the length of the entire Nile Valley, and that is a staggering amount of water. It is the weight of 1 billion bathtubs. You feel a strange thrill. It's happening. The engine of the world is turning over. You lean back against the cold stone, watching the water line lick at the marble. You are going to be here a while. The season of the rise lasts for weeks. You better get comfortable with the damp, the dark, and the dates. Time in the Nilometer does not move in hours or minutes. It moves in fingers. Days turn into weeks. The weeks melt into the suffocating heat of July and August. You are still sitting on that stone bench, but the atmosphere has shifted. The cool, damp silence of the early summer has been replaced by a humid, heavy tension. The air inside the shaft is thick, clinging to your skin like a wet sheet. Outside, the city of Fustat is baking. The streets are dusty ovens. But down here, the only thing that matters is the water. And the water has changed. It is no longer the dark, clear mirror you saw when you arrived. The green water, the initial pulse filled with algae and swamp debris, has passed. Now comes the Alma Alamar, the red water. You watch it swirl around the column. It is a rich, reddish-brown chocolate milk color, thick with the volcanic soil of the Ethiopian highlands. It smells earthy, metallic, and potent. It smells like a wet garden on a grand scale. This is the silt that built the pyramids. This is the mud that feeds the wheat that feeds the empire. And there is a lot of it. The water level is rising faster now. It is climbing the column, swallowing the markings one by one. 10 cubits. 11 cubits. 12. You have entered the season of bureaucratic anxiety. Every morning, just after the dawn prayer, the ritual repeats. The guardian descends the stairs, which are fewer now, as the water is much closer to the top, and takes the measurement. But he doesn't just write it down in his private ledger anymore. Now, he has an audience. Standing at the top of the pit, leaning nervously over the railing, are the Munadi al-Nil, the criers of the Nile. These are the town broadcasters, the human news tickers of medieval Cairo. They are waiting for the number. The guardian checks the level. He looks up. 14 cubits and 3 fingers, he shouts, his voice echoing up the limestone shaft. The criers scramble away. You can hear their sandals slapping on the pavement outside as they run toward the city. They will scatter through the streets of Fustat and Cairo, chanting the daily number. God has increased the blessed Nile, 14 cubits and 3 fingers. You sit back on your bench, listening to the fading shouts. It seems quaint, doesn't it? A daily weather report delivered by a guy shouting. But the implications of that number are terrifyingly precise. A mainstream historical fact, the daily announcement of the Nile level was the most important economic indicator of the year. If the criers announced a stall in the rise, the price of bread in the markets would triple by noon. Hoarders would lock their granaries. Bakers would hide their flour. The entire economy was pegged to the height of that water. It was the medieval equivalent of the stock market ticker tape, and a single bad reading could cause a recession before lunch. You watch the water lap at the 14-cubit mark. It's a dangerous time. This is the stalling period. Sometimes the river teases. It rushes up, and then stops for a week. The heat intensifies. The people start to pray louder. The caliph starts to sweat in his palace, looking at his budget spreadsheets. This is where the bureaucracy gets truly cynical. The state needs the water to reach 16 cubits. Why? Because of the kharaj, the land tax god. A quirky fringe tidbit. Under Islamic law, and Roman law before it, the government could not collect the full land tax if the land couldn't be irrigated. If the Nile didn't hit 16 cubits, they couldn't open the canals to flood the high fields. If they couldn't flood the fields, they couldn't tax the farmers. So the government had a massive vested interest in that water hitting the magic number. There are even legends of rulers pressuring the guardian to round up the measurements just so they could balance the books. You look at the guardian. He is impassive. He is dipping a piece of bread into the red water and eating it. Apparently, it's good luck. Or maybe he just likes the taste of Ethiopia. He catches you staring and shrugs. It is thick, he says. Good soil. You spend your afternoons watching the eddies of silt curl around the octagonal marble. The boredom is profound, but it is a high-stakes boredom. It is the boredom of waiting for a bomb to go off or waiting for a pot to boil when you are starving. You start to obsess over the markings. The fingers on the column seem to mock you. Come on. You whisper to the brown sludge. Just 1 more inch. You imagine the water rushing through the great gorges of the south, tumbling over the cataracts, surging past the temples of Luxor, past the pyramids of Giza, just to get here, to this pit, to annoy you with its slowness. Historians still argue about the exact statistical reliability of the medieval records kept at the Nilometer. While the series of data is one of the longest in human history, spanning over 1,000 years, there are suspicious gaps and periods of impossible consistency. Some scholars suggest that during years of famine, the Guardians might have simply stopped recording the low levels to avoid officializing the disaster, or perhaps they were ordered to cook the books to maintain public order. Watching the Guardian nap against the wall, you realize that history is often just a guy with a pen deciding what to write down. The days drag on into late August. The air is so humid you feel like a damp sponge. The water is now high, very high. It is lapping at the 15th cubit. The staircase is mostly submerged. You have had to move your bench up to a higher landing. The acoustic of the pit has changed. It is no longer a deep, hollow echo. It is a loud, sloshing presence. The water is right there. You can hear the river churning outside, pressing against the walls of the island. The red water is swirling violently now, agitated by the volume. The tension in the city above is reaching a breaking point. You can feel it vibrating through the stones. The mosques are full of people praying for the Wafa, the Plenitude. The criers are running back and forth twice a day now. 15 cubits and 12 fingers. 15 cubits and 18 fingers. It is agonizingly close. You find yourself cheering for the water. Rise, you muddy beast, rise. The Guardian is no longer sleeping. He is pacing the upper landing. He is checking the column every hour. He is muttering prayers. He knows that if it stops now, at 15 cubits, it is the worst possible outcome. High enough to cause hope, low enough to cause ruin. It is the zone of almost. But then, one evening, as the sun is setting and turning the red water into a pool of liquid blood, you hear a sound. A deep, subterranean groan. The pressure in the tunnels is shifting. The water surges. It washes over the mark of the 16th cubit. It holds. It rises another finger. The Guardian freezes. He leans over the rail. He stares. He blinks. He turns to you, and for the first time in 2 months he smiles. A toothless, relieved grin. It is finished, he whispers. He rushes up the stairs to the surface. You follow him, your legs stiff from weeks of sitting. You emerge into the twilight air, which suddenly feels sweet. The Guardian takes a deep breath and yells with a lung capacity you didn't know he had. Wafa al-Nil, 16 cubits. God is great. The shout goes out. A distant cheer erupts from the riverbank. Then another. Then bells start ringing. Drums start beating. The bureaucracy of anxiety is over. The bureaucracy of celebration is about to begin. You leave the damp, echoing solitude of the Nilometer behind. The Guardian has done his job. The number has been verified. The criers have run their lungs ragged, and now the island of Rhoda is transforming. The quiet garden sanctuary is being invaded by a flotilla of pleasure barges, skiffs, and rafts. You step off the island and back onto a boat, but this time, you are not heading back to the dusty streets of Fustat. You are joining a procession. You are heading to the college. The college is the great canal that runs through the heart of Cairo. For most of the year, it is a dry, dusty ditch used as a garbage dump or a shortcut for donkeys. But right now, at its mouth near the river, a massive earthen dam, the Sud, is blocking the rising Nile from entering the city. This is the main event. This is the Super Bowl of medieval hydrology, the breaking of the dam. You arrive at the site, and the sensory overload is immediate. After months of sitting in a dark pit listening to drips, you are suddenly assaulted by color and noise. The riverbanks are lined with thousands of people. Tents have been erected, silks of saffron, indigo, and crimson fluttering in the breeze. The smell of roasting lamb and sweet fritters overpowers the smell of the river mud. It is a carnival. The water behind the dam is pressing hard, dark and heavy, hungry to get into the canal. On the dry side of the dam, workmen are standing ready with spades and mattocks, looking nervous. They know that once this wall goes, they have about 30 seconds to get out of the way before they become part of the irrigation system. A mainstream historical fact. This festival, the Wafa al-Nil, was one of the few times when the rigid social stratification of Egypt dissolved. The caliph, or his representative, would come down from the citadel in a golden galley. Christians, Muslims, and Jews would mingle on the banks. It was a national holiday that predated religion. Everyone eats bread, so everyone worships the water. You find a spot near the official pavilion. The governor of Egypt has arrived. He is wearing robes so stiff with gold embroidery they look like armor. He raises his hand. The drums stop. The crowd holds its breath. This is the moment the city has been waiting for since the last harvest. He drops a silken handkerchief. The signal. The workmen on the dam swing their pickaxes. Thwack, thwack. They hack at the top of the earthen wall. A trickle of water spills over. Then, a stream. Then, with a roar that sounds like a collapsing building, the dam gives way. The brown wall of the Nile punches through the breach, surging into the dry canal bed with terrifying speed. The crowd erupts. People are cheering, weeping, and throwing flowers into the rushing water. The workmen scramble up the banks just in time, their tunics soaked. But there's something else going into the water. You watch as a conical structure made of clay and painted to look like a woman is tossed into the current. A quirky fringe tidbit. This is the Bride of the Nile. You might have heard the legends, mostly spread by Greek historians and later Hollywood movies, that the ancient Egyptians sacrificed a live virgin to the river every year to ensure the flood. Almost certainly, this never happened. It was likely a myth invented to make the ancients look barbaric. By the medieval period, the sacrifice had become a polite, symbolic ritual where they threw a clay doll or a bride made of mud into the river. It's a lot less gruesome, though still a bit hard on the doll. You watch the bride dissolve into the brown torrent. The water is racing down the canal now, heading deep into the city. It will fill the ponds, the cisterns, and the private lakes of the wealthy. It will transform Cairo from a dusty desert city into a momentary Venice. You follow the crowd as they chase the water. It is a strange, jubilant race. Boys are running alongside the canal, keeping pace with the foaming leading edge of the flood. Historians still argue about the exact route and engineering of the ancient College Canal. Some say it followed the path of a natural wadi, while others claim it was a pharaonic engineering marvel designed to connect the Nile to the Red Sea, the canal of the pharaohs. Regardless of who dug it, right now, it is doing its job. It is bringing the Nile to the front door of the bakery. As night falls, the celebration shifts gears. You are no longer watching a hydraulic event. You are at a party. The river is filled with boats carrying lanterns. The reflection of thousands of tiny lights dances on the turbulent, red-brown water dark. It looks like the Milky Way has fallen into the Nile. You sit on the grassy bank exhausted. You have spent months in the dark, watching a stone column, worrying about famine. And now, the relief is physical. The tension that held the city in a chokehold has snapped. The water is here. The harvest is guaranteed. The taxes will be paid. You watch a family nearby sharing a loaf of bread and a melon. They are laughing. The father is splashing some of the new water onto his face. It is muddy and gross, but to him, it is holy. The noise of the festival drags on late into the night. Music, singing, the popping of fireworks. But you are tired. The adrenaline of the dam breaking is fading, replaced by the heavy, humid lethargy of the flood season. The river has done its work. It has risen. It has breached. Now, it just needs to sit. The final phase of the cycle isn't about action. It's about settling. The water needs to stand still on the fields, dropping its precious cargo of silt before it retreats back to its bed. You close your eyes, listening to the rush of the water in the canal. It is a steady, powerful sound. It is the sound of a country exhaling. The carnival is over. The shouting has faded. The fireworks have long since fizzled into wet ash floating downstream. You are standing on the bank of the river again, But it is a different season now. It is late autumn, perhaps early winter. The air has lost its suffocating humid weight and has turned crisp and cool. The sky is a piercing, cloudless blue. You are watching the great retreat. Just as agonizingly slowly as it rose, the water is now falling. The Nile is exhaling. It is pulling back from the edges of the valley, shrinking into its main channel, leaving behind the gift it carried all the way from the heart of Africa. You step off the paved road and onto the field. Your boots sink. Deep dive. Squelch. You are standing in the Kemet. A mainstream historical fact. This is what the ancient Egyptians actually called their country, Kemet, which translates to the Black Land. They distinguished it sharply from Deshret, the red land of the inhospitable desert. Looking at your boots now, caked in thick, dark, heavy sludge, you understand the name. This isn't just dirt. It is a concentrated biological miracle. It is a layer of nutrient-rich volcanic silt, sometimes inches thick, that has coated every square foot of the floodplain like a layer of dark chocolate frosting. You take a step, fighting the suction of the mud. It is sticky. It smells intense. A deep, pungent aroma of wet earth, decaying algae, and raw fertility. It is the smell of a garden waiting to happen. The landscape looks chaotic. The flood has erased the world. Fences are gone. Paths are gone. Landmarks have been buried under the blanket of silt. The valley is a blank slate, smoothed over by the water. But chaos is bad for business, and Egypt is, above all, a business. So, as the water retreats, you see the first wave of people returning to the land. They are not farmers. They are geometers. You watch a team of men wading through the knee-deep mud. They are holding long cords knotted at specific intervals. These are the rope stretchers. Their job is to redraw the map. Since the mud has wiped away the property lines, they have to use geometry and trigonometry to figure out where Ahmed's farm ends and Ramses' farm begins. A quirky fringe tidbit. The Greeks, including the famous Herodotus, believed that the science of geometry, literally earth measuring, was invented in Egypt specifically because of this annual need to resurvey the mud. If the Nile didn't erase the borders every year, humanity might not have figured out the hypotenuse quite so quickly. So you can thank the Nile mud for your high school math homework. You watch them drive wooden stakes into the soft ground, shouting coordinates. It is a slow, methodical restoration of order. The water leaves, the math returns. Behind the surveyors come the sowers. They don't plow the earth. There is no need. The ground is soft and moist. They simply walk across the mud, scattering seeds, wheat, barley, flax, dahliak. Sometimes they drive pigs or cattle across the fields to trample the seeds into the silt. It is lazy farming, but it is incredibly effective. You just add seeds to the mud, wait a few months, and you get an empire. You find a dry rock to sit on and scrape the heaviest mud from your soles. You watch the river. It is no longer the angry red torrent of August. It is calming down. The color is shifting back from chocolate brown to a majestic blue-green. It is returning to its bed, like a beast going back to its cage after feeding time. The birds are returning too. Great flocks of ibises, herons, and migrating ducks are descending on the drying pools left behind by the flood. The air is filled with the soft beating of wings and the quiet calls of waterfowl. It is a peaceful, pastoral scene. Historians still argue about the political implications of this irrigation cycle. The famous hydraulic hypothesis by Carl Wittfogel suggested that the need to manage this massive flood created the Oriental despotism, a centralized, authoritarian government, because you needed a pharaoh to tell the water where to go. But modern archaeologists have found that much of the irrigation was actually managed locally, by small communities cooperating. Standing here, watching the neighbors help each other pull a cow out of a mud pit, the cooperative theory feels more true. It's not a despot order in the water. It's just neighbors dealing with the mud. The sun begins to dip low, casting long purple shadows across the flat, black expanse. The world feels heavy and drowsy. The frenetic energy of the rise is gone. The anxiety of the watch is gone. The celebration of the breach is gone. Now, there is only the slow, quiet work of the soil. You think back to the dark pit of the Nilometer. You think of the guardian, probably sleeping soundly on his stone bench for the first time in months, his ledger closed. The column is drying out, the waterline creeping back down the marble, exposing the lower cubits again. It will wait there, in the dark, until next June. The cycle is complete. The pulse has beaten. You look at the vast expanse of wet fields stretching to the horizon. It looks like a dark quilt pulled up to the chin of the valley. The seeds are tucked in. The water has done its job. Now, the land needs to do the only thing left to do. It needs to rest. Wind down. The sun has vanished below the western desert now. The sky is a gradient of fading indigo and soft violet. The air is cooling rapidly, settling over the valley like a soft, heavy blanket. The birds have settled into the reeds, their calls fading into silence. The mud is silent. It is settling, compacting, holding the moisture in its dark embrace. The millions of seeds scattered today are safe in the cool, wet earth, ready to sleep through the winter. You are tired. The long months of the flood watch have worn you down. The humidity, the heat, the noise and the mud. It all feels distant now. You are left with the stillness of the aftermath. You walk slowly back towards the boat waiting to take you across the quiet river. The water is smooth as glass, reflecting the first stars appearing overhead. Plip, plip. The sound of the oars dipping into the water is gentle, rhythmic, hypnotic. You lean back against the wooden hull. You let your eyes close. You imagine the water in the Nilometer, deep underground, perfectly still. No ripples, no rising. Just a pool of dark, quiet water resting in the stone heart of the island. The river is sleeping. The land is sleeping. The guardian is sleeping. Your breathing slows, matching the slow, lazy current of the retreating Nile. In, deep and cool. Out, long and slow. You are drifting. You are floating on a raft of calm, moving gently downstream towards the dark, quiet sea of sleep. There is nothing to measure anymore. No numbers to check. No anxieties to hold. The water will return when it returns. But for now, everything is finished. Everything is provided. Everything is at rest. You are safe. You are warm. You are asleep. End of script. Dao. Sweet dreams.